Didn't record all of our mess ups.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're going to back up. So we're going to do this clear pin markings and just real quick. All right, we already talked briefly because I didn't record. So briefly, we're talking about how a participle has a verbal and adjectival function. And in the verbal function, we're going to see tense, present, aorist, and perfect. There's also future. And if you look on the book on page 326 and 327, there's a list of 12 or 13, depending on perspective, of future tense participles. But our emphasis is going to be in the present, aorist, and perfect tense. There's also voice. We're familiar with active, middle, passive. The adjectival function is going to be what we would normally see in our nouns and pronouns and adjectives, right? Case, number, and gender. Case is nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, gender, number, singular, plural, gender, masculine, feminine, neuter. Nothing new here. The verbal characteristics, the verbal characteristics combined with the verbal adjective or the adjectival characteristics is going to be bridged by that participle morpheme, right? So we'll have a morpheme, R-P-H-E, morpheme, a participle morpheme that helps bridge that. And so it becomes, quite recognizable. As the way it functions, it will function either adverbally. An adverb modifies another verb, so if it's going to function adverbally, it's going to tell us something more about the verb, typically something that's occurring with it while this was occurring, after that occurred, because this occurred, or causal effect. And adjectively, it's going to modify typically a noun or pronoun and describe or limit that noun or pronoun. Can also stand like an adjective, can stand in place as the noun or pronoun, functioning as a subject or as a object. So, all right, and let me clear this because this is just a quick review, and I get us caught up. All right, so like a verb, participles are built on present, aorist, and perfect. As we mentioned, the features on page 326 and 27. And like a verb, participles have a voice, active, middle, or passive. But unlike a verb, they do not have a mood, and this is significant. That's why we say it's a present active participle, and not a present active indicative or subjective or imperative. There's no mood, and specifically the fact that the indicative is associated with absolute time, and once we move out of the indicative mood, time the emphasis on time changes depending upon what mood you're in. And on a participle, the time becomes relative, and that's really the key, where it's determined by the mood of the main verb as well as the tense. So what we want to emphasize, though, is not so much time, but the aspect or the kind of action. And that is really the key to understanding how participles function in a sentence. Understand the participles never, never, never the main verb of the sentence. It can modify the main verb, or it can be modifying another noun or pronoun, or it could be standing in place of a noun or pronoun, but it's never the main verb. If the present tense, the participle in the present tense, then it's generally going to be a continuous action, or what we'd say is imperfective aspect, imperfective ongoing kind of action. And it will then generally have a translation that's associated with the main verb at the same time. While this happened, then whatever. Or causal, because this happened, whatever. If it's an aorist tense participle, then typically it's undefined, or what we would say is perfective aspect. And we typically translate it with an ed versus the ing for the present tense participle. The aorist, which is what we're going to spend today on, we'll typically use an ed translation. And normally we would translate it as an event that occurred prior to the main verb. So often we would say, after they went whatever, then Jesus spoke to the whatever the case. And then and next week we'll be moving into the perfect tense. I think it's next week, where just like in the perfect indicative, it indicates a completed action with ongoing or continuing results. And so we'll get more into that later. So that's kind of where we were. Let's got us caught up. This is the same thing relative to the adjectival side of the participle. Um, the adjective, just like we had mentioned, has functions has a case, a number, and gender, and the participle adjectival function has the same thing, right? The nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative, and it will modify a noun or pronoun to describe or limit, right? To describe would be like the pretty dress. To limit it might be the pretty blue dress. Both adjectives, they're both are descriptive and it has a limiting it. Once you describe it, you generally limit it from all other dresses. And as we mentioned, it can stand in place of a noun functioning as a subject for the object. Any questions so far? Y'all remember all this, right? This is kind of what we did really before their 2-week break, really like 2 weeks before that, I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, pretty much. All right. I'll take it pretty much. All right, now here's the fun part. Participle morphemes. All right, we said that the verbal elements need to mesh together with the adjectival elements. Right, verbal elements is going to be tense and voice. The adjectival elements are going to be case, number, and gender. And we need something in between. And Jake correctly said it's the morphemes that bridge that gap. And so active morphemes, active voice, I'm emphasizing this, has a new tau. And for the masculine and neuter. I'm going to focus on that now, okay? And I do want to kind of go over a little bit why we don't see a new tau in some of these places. Excuse my, that needs to move over. Okay. Now, in the genitive, you see the new tau is very visible. There's our connecting vowel. There's our participle morpheme. And here's our case ending, right? And so then we'll skip the feminine for now. There's our connecting vowel. There's our participle morpheme. And there's our case ending in the genitive, right? Looks very familiar. Let's start with here. Can you remember, if this is a new tau, why is this in Omicron new? What happened to the tau?
The tau drops off because it can't stand alone at the end.
Very good. Noun rule number 8, right?
Mhm.
We went over noun rules number 8. The tau will not stand alone at the end. It doesn't like to stand out in that way, so it just goes away. It takes his basketball and goes home. I'm not playing the game. What about here? This is a little more complex. This is a new tau, right? It has a connecting vowel, Omicron, plus the participle morpheme, plus the case ending, which is a sigma. For this is, by the way, a 3-1-3 declension pattern, right? Third declension for masculine, first declension for feminine, and third declension for neuter. You remember those, right? Kind of. Yeah.
The 3-1-3, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is actually for the nominative singular a sigma ending. If you look it up in your matrix there, that's the sigma ending, case ending for the nominative singular and the masculine third declension form. It's third declension because we actually have a consonantal ending before the case endings. And so that's why we're using a third declension here. But what happens to this tau?
So the tau can't stand on its own.
It's not standing on its own. We're going to add a sigma to it, right? And okay. I mean, really, why isn't this new tau sigma? Why isn't it that? That's what it's supposed to be, right? I've got my connecting vowel, my new tau, participle morpheme, and my case ending right there. Okay, so why isn't it Omicron new tau sigma?
Would it be dealing with like the square of stops to where?
Yes, very well, very good, Samuel. Yeah. The tau is a dental, right? When you do, what does it see? A labial, and a sigma comes up to a label, it changes to a C. When you do the velar, when the velar letter comes up to a sigma, it changes to a C. And when you do a dental and it comes up against a sigma, then it takes the sigma form. And so this then becomes Omicron nu sigma. But that's not this. So what happened? This is more complex. It drove me crazy. I was trying to figure out why. Okay. So just to simplify it, the nu sigma can exist in the middle of a word, but not at the end of a word.
Okay.
And that's all that is. And so the sigma drops when it's at the end. And so you get the Omicron nu. Why does this Omicron in omega?
Could it be that it's bumping up against a vowel, and so lengthening?
Well, you're close, but not because it's bumping up against a vowel. It's compensating. It's compensating for the changes that occur, specifically the
Oh.
vowel dropping off.
Oh, okay.
So it's called an ablaut, if you remember that. It's
Yeah.
lengthening, and that's how you get this omega nu. So I went through all that not because I want you to be like, oh, this is on the test, you need to memorize this. No, I want you. If you're anything like me, I don't understand why I don't see a new tau here or here. Well, the new tau is there, but things change because of various grammatical rules. And the new tau is actually here, and that's why we see an omega nu, and it just makes more sense to see what's happening. So anyway, I wanted to sort of highlight that. I don't know, maybe it's not of interest to you. The feminine uses the usa or usace in the genitive form. And again, we're doing a 3 1 3 pattern. So the active morphemes, the key here is that I want you to remember is the new tau. We're emphasizing the new tau more than we have feminine because I think, if I remember right, feminine plus neuter combined doesn't even equal, I want to say there's 7 times more masculine active than there are feminine and neuter combined. I'm not positive, but there's definitely more. I just don't remember the number. So you'll see this a lot more. All right, questions? Great. Jake, no questions. Okay. All right, so now let's put it together. So we have an unaugmented, we're going to talk about the aorist, and we're going to do the first aorist and then the second aorist. You remember, just like we've had before, we have an aorist is an aorist is an aorist. But just like we have the word swim, swam, swum, there are some words in English that changes its spelling, its form, and the same thing in Greek. And in Greek, we have a first aorist and a second aorist that does the same thing. So in the first aorist, we're going to have an unaugmented aorist tense stem. Now we've seen the aorist tense stem before, but it's always been augmented, right? Which tenses have the augmented tense stem? Do you remember?
The
Active.
secondary.
No. Which tense stems in the indicative mood has we learned before, has the augmented, right? That would be the epsilon, like an epsilon here. Which tense stems? There's one of them right there for you.
The perfect has the.
That's not an augment. That's a reduplication, which we'll get to, right?
Okay.
Right. I mean, you understand what you're saying. It does add a prefix, right?
Yeah.
In terms of technical names, that's a reduplication. Now I'm asking about the augment where we added epsilon.
The imperfect.
And
The aorist.
yes, very good. Imperfect
first,
and aorist.
First
But-
and second aorist.
Okay. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter. First or second. First or second is just sort of its form. An aorist is an aorist and aorist, okay? But to recognize an aorist, sometimes there's a difference between the form of first aorist, well, there always is a difference between the form of a first aorist and the form of a second aorist. And so that's kind of why but let me ask you this. Okay, if in the indicative mood, the aorist and the imperfect has an augment, why in the participle Why in the participle is it unaugmented? Why is the epsilon not there in the participle?
Could you ask that again? I couldn't really
Okay.
understand.
If in the indicative mood, as you noted, the epsilon is the augment to the tense stem, right? We augments it for the indicative mood or the aorist and the imperfect. Aorist and imperfect. Okay, those two tense stems have an augment in the indicative mood.
Mm-hmm.
But in the participle, we don't have the augment. It's unaugmented. For the aorist, we don't have an imperfect tense stem in the participle. So on the aorist, why is it unaugmented? Why is the epsilon not there? How come there's no epsilon?
Because it doesn't have a mood.
You're very close, Jake. You're very, very close.
Thought
You
it had to
said
deal with if it's adverbial or adjectival.
no.
That's my best guess. Is that I mean?
I just drew the picture for you.
Because it's 12.
Oh, I couldn't read. Oh, let me blow it up here. I can see it. Okay. Because it's
time.
2 o'clock.
Time, and it does relate to the mood. You're right, Jake. But because time is not a factor, it's relative for a participle. Remember, there's a reason this epsilon is added to the imperfect in the aorist in the other mood, in the indicative mood. There's a reason, because in the aorist tense and the imperfect tense, it's past time. It is past. But in the participle, time is relative, and so we don't make it past because its time is based on the main verb, not if it's adverbial, not the participle itself. That's why I went over that because I just want you to start thinking through this so it makes sense to you. I mean, we could just say, hey, it's an augment and you can memorize it, but I want you to see why. All right, because I think that helps you in the long run. I hope it does. Anyway. All right, so it is an unaugmented aorist tense stem. It uses a tense formative. We're talking about the first aorist participle in the active voice. It uses a tense formative. What is that tense formative?
The is it
Two Greek
the new
letters.
towel?
No, not the new tau. That's the participle morpheme. You're correct there. That's the participle morpheme.
Oh,
But
the tense formative.
we want an aorist tense. What tense formative do we use? It's 2 letters. One begins with a sigma. The other ends in an alpha.
So the sigma alpha.
Very good. That's it.
Okay, there we go.
All right. So we have our tense formative. There's no connecting vowel. Why is there no connecting vowel?
Because it doesn't have one.
Yeah, you're a genius. Wow. Why is there no connecting vowel? Connecting vowel is going to be an omicron or an epsilon, right? And you have a connecting vowel to connect. You need a vowel to connect 2 consonants, right? Generally, some consonants coming together, it's hard to pronounce, so you put a connecting vowel. Why?
Well, there's no, because it ends with a sigma alpha.
There you go. Because it ends, the sigma alpha ends with a vowel.
A vowel, yeah.
There we go.
Right? All right. Again, I'm just trying to make you think through this. Okay, and then we have our case endings, right? Case endings are going to be the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and the accusative, masculine, singular, masculine, feminine, or neuter, whether it be 3-1-3 pattern or 2-1-2 pattern. And here in the active, we are always talking the 3-1-3 pattern. Why would we be talking the 3-1-3 pattern? Well, for time's sake, it's because third declension is associated with a consonant coming up against the normally the stem ending, but coming up against the case endings, right? So We get lu plus r tense formative. Now, this is a tense formative. It is not the participle morpheme. What's a tense formative? It's telling you what tense it is. What tense is sigma alpha? It's aorist. Lusa und es. Lusantes. Lusantes. Excuse me. Let's say it that way. Lusantes. All right. Make sense? Kind of walk through it?
Yes.
Let's look at the big picture, right? Now, all right. Swim, swam, swum. Okay. Luo, balo, or ginomai, or lambano. There are some Greek words that are in a second aorist form. And there is, again, an unaugmented aorist tense stem, nothing new. But this time there's a connecting vowel and no tense formative. There's not a sigma alpha. There's not a tense formative at all. But we do have the connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon. And then we add our participle morpheme. Again, it's active voice. So it's going to be the new tau. And then we add our case endings. Now, how do we know this is an aorist? Anybody know? If you don't know, you can just read the chart. How do we know it's an aorist?
Well, I can
Because
tell you
it's
how I would
using
find
the
out, but
Go ahead, Jake.
well, I would look in the book and see, the lexical form and look at the, but I
well,
know you're asking a different question.
No, you're actually on the right track, but go ahead, Sam.
it's using the aorist tense stem.
Yeah, the aorist tense stem is going to be here. If we go back to our present tense stem, it has the double lambda.
Mm-hmm.
The imperfect tense stem, which is not used for participle, but regardless, is also the double lambda, right? The single lambda is actually the root stem for the root. And what happens is, you remember, the present tense will modify that, and you have the double lambda. In words like lambano, I think that's right. This is the present tense, but in the aorist, it's going to be, well, it's going to be sigma alpha. Something like that. I don't remember now. Anyway, I don't remember the ending. But point being is that the mu drops off. So basically, it's the stem that is going to give us the main clue that the aorist uses really the standard stem, but it's not the same as the present tense stem. But everything else is the same. We have a connecting vowel, so we don't have a tense stem. It's the tense stem, or excuse me, we don't have a tense formative. It's a tense stem that's going to tell us that it's the aorist. We do have our new tau for the active new tau, and we have our case endings. Case endings are going to be 3-1-3 pattern, right? So this is a third declension. This is actually the connecting vowel. Well, no, this is going to be the plural. So this would be the case ending for the plural. Balantes, casting out, plural form. All right, you guys not lost yet? I'm doing my best to lose you.
Not yet.
All right, now just to look at it. For active, we're going to have participle morphemes. Just pull them all up. Okay. There's our case ending, or excuse me, our tense formative, and there's our third declension, 3-1-3 pattern, and this is just looking at 3-3, by the way, this singular and plural. There's our sigma, the new tau. What happened to the new tau? I got my sigma alpha. I don't need a connecting vowel. I put my new tau in the sigma. Same thing, right? that goes, and that goes, and I get my sigma alpha sigma. That's why we got Lusas. Lusas, Lusantas, there's our tense formative, there's our participle morpheme, and there's our genitive case ending. All right, Omicron sigma. Lusanti, there's our sigma alpha, there's our case or participle morpheme, and our dative. Lusanta, accusative. These should not be new. These are all we did before. Lusantes, there's the plural form of the case ending, our tense formative and participle morpheme. Lusantone, that omega nu, man, you can't forget that. It's impossible to forget. Lusasi or Lusasine, and Lusantas. Kind of makes sense? All right. Putting the whole picture together, there's our first aorist participles for active voice, right? Lusas, Lusantas, Lusanti, Lusanta. And we'll stay with the 3-1-3 pattern here. 3-1-3, singular 3-1-3, plural. Let's look at third declension. Lusas, Lusantas, Lusanti, Lusanta, Lusan, Lusantas, Lusanti, Lusan. These follow the same, because we're doing case endings here, they follow the same rules that we had in nouns. This is going to be the same as this. This is going to be the same as this. This is going to be the same as this. This is going to be the same as that. That's going to be the same as that. Same noun rules we had before. Okay. So in the plural, lusantes, remember it's third declension. It's a sigma ending. Epsilon sigma for plural. Excuse me. Lusantone, lusasi, lusantas. Lusanta, Lusantone, Lusansi, Lusanta, and then the feminine, the first declension, Lusasa, Lusasa, Lusases, Lusase, Lusasan, and Lusasai, Lusason, Lusasais, Lusasas. And really, you're just putting together things you already know, and you're adding a participle morpheme, and that's how it looks. Second aorist, same thing, except we don't have a tense formative. All right, everything else is the same, but there's no tense formative. We know it's a aorist because of it's using the aorist tense stem, the ba, not the double lambda. Everything else is the same. Okay. Now middle passive. I'm going to run through this a little quick. Yeah, because it's really the exact same thing. We're going to use the unaugmented aorist tense stem. We are going to have a tense formative, right? But it's not going to be, or it's going to be the sigma alpha for the middle, but not the passive. The middle is going to be the sigma alpha. The passive is going to be the theta eta. That's how you know the difference. And so okay, I know I wrote that and it's correct, but this is associated with the participle morpheme. So this tense formative for the middle is going to be the sigma alpha. For the passive, it's going to be the theta eta. Right? And then we're going to have a middle passive participle morpheme, and that's also going to change, and then our case ending. So same format, augmented aorist tense stem, we'll have a tense formative, we'll have a participle morpheme and case endings. In the middle form, we are still using we are now switching. Instead of a 3-1-3 case endings, we're going to now do a 2-1-2 case endings. We have our tense stem, our tense formative. Now we have our participle morpheme, meno. If it's feminine, it'd be mene. And then we add our case endings. In this case, the case endings are second declension for the masculine and second declension for the neuter and first declension for the feminine. And so we get lusa menoi for the middle. The passive is different. The aorist passive is going to use the 3-1-3 third declension or third 3-1-3 declension pattern, and it's going to use the new tau. And so we see our tense stem. We see a passive tense formative. The tense formative is the theta eta. We see not that, but we see the new tau. I messed up. And then we see the ending, which is not that. It's the epsilon sigma. I did copy, cut, and paste, and I didn't change those. So it is the Luthentes. Here's the key. Active voices plus the aorist passive as the new tau. All other middle and middle voices, we use the min, mina, or mine, and we have a 2-1-2 declension pattern, where this has a 3-1-3 declension pattern. If you know those two things, you can figure them all out. Okay, that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
All right. So if we put it together, here's our middle, and middle we have our tense formative, and we have our min with the minos, lusaminu, lusamino, lusaminon, lusaminoi, lusaminone, lusaminois, and lusaminus. Same thing you've learned before. These are the two, we don't have the one here, but the 2-1-2 pattern, right? So this is the case endings for the second declensions. And we put the whole thing together. Lusaminos, lusaminu, lusaminoi, lusaminon. Hopefully these all look familiar to you. If you remember your nouns, right? Lusaminon, lusaminu, lusaminoi, lusaminon. Same thing we learned before. Those are going to be the same. That's going to be the same. That's going to be the same. Again, we have a 2-1-2 pattern for the adjectival endings, the case endings. Okay, lusaminoi, there's our plural form. Lusaminon, lusaminois, dative plural. Lusaminos, accusative plural. Lusamina, lusaminon, lusaminois, lusamina. In the feminine, same thing we've seen. Lusamine, lusamines, lusamine, lusaminane, minai, minon, minais, minos. Nothing new. Now the second aorist, all right, swim, swam, swum, still unaugmented. We're going to use a connecting vowel still, not the tense formative. We're going to use the middle passive participle morphemes. For the middle, we're staying with the 2-1-2 declension pattern for our case endings, right? 2-1-2. We're here. Now, and we're going to know the tense stem is going to help us to understand that this is the aorist tense stem because it doesn't have the double onda. There's our connecting vowel and our min. So we get balaminos. And there's our middle form. For the passive form, it's the same thing. We're going to use here. We're going to use the new tau, which is the active voice, used for all active and the aorist passive, and it's going to be use a 3-1-3-1-3 declension pattern, and so we get gorafentes. A lot of stuff I know, but I want you to see the patterns. Every single pattern you've already seen, you've already done. It's just now kind of making sure you put them together. So in the passive, our participle morpheme, participle morpheme is Obviously, this would be a first aorist if we have a participle morpheme. The theta eta for passive, theta eta for passive, theta, not participle morpheme, excuse me, tense formative. Tense formative, theta eta, right? Our passive is going to be the new tau. It's going to use the same, passive is going to use that new tau, just like the active voice does. All other middle is going to use the min, the minne. So we get luthentes, luthentone, lutentency, lutentos. And, you know, you can go over this. Luthase, luthentos, luthenti, luthenta, luthen, luthentos, luthenti, luthenten. This is a 3-1. Yeah, 3-1-3 pattern because it's passive. And it's going to use the participle morpheme of the new tau. New tau, case ending. New tau, case ending. Okay? Just remember the aorist passive is going to have the same participle morpheme and the same declension pattern for case endings as the active voice. All others, middle, is going to use the 2-1-2 case ending for middle voice, and it'll have a min, minne, minna participle morpheme. And here's that master participle chart. We've had a master verb chart. Here's the master participle chart. In our present, active and middle, we're using the present tense stem. We have connecting vowels. We're going to use for the active, we're going to use the new tau with the uc for feminine, right? And this is going to be, and then we're going to use the, with the new tau, we're going to use the adjectival case endings as a 3-1-3 pattern, right? And for the middle, we have our, for present, our connecting vowel, we have the minna, minne, and because it's middle, we're using the 2-1-2, middle 2-1-2 pattern for the case endings. And so here you get legantes, that's that 3-1-3 case ending. Legaminoi, that's that 2-1-2 case ending. And so here's the 6 forms that you really want to kind of know. It's the nominative and genitive for your masculine, feminine, neuter, the own, usi, the own. Those are the singular, ontos, uses, and ontos. For the nominative, the genitive, feminine, and nominative, masculine, nominative, feminine, nominative, nominative, neuter. And then you get the genitive, masculine, genitive, feminine, and genitive, neuter. So you just follow that pattern. Here's aminois, amine, aminon. And for the genitive, aminu, aminase, aminu. And then you can follow the rest of the pattern because you already have memorized all that. First aorist, active, middle, and passive. Active will be the new tau. Passive will be the new tau. Middle will be the minna, minne. The first aorist is going to use the sigma alpha for the tense formative, and for the passive, the theta eta. First aorist. Okay. Second aorist. Right. Second aorist, active, middle, passive. Again, active, and the aorist passive is going to use the new tau. And we're not going to have the tense formative, but we'll have the connecting vowels. And we'll have minna, minne for the middle because it's using the 2-1-2 pattern, the 3-1-3 pattern for the passive and the active. And you just need to know the case endings. It's not, it looks complicated because it's a lot, but it's following the same thing. And the key is it active, is it middle, or is it passive voice? If it's active, it most likely is going to have a new tau. If it's aorist passive, it's going to have a new tau or participle morpheme. Feminine is almost always usa. And the middle. excuse me, the middle is going to be the men, mena or mene.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
When we went through the indicative mood,
Yeah.
Through, present, imperfect, the whole gamut there, you had active voice, I believe,
Right.
and then middle passive. And
Right.
generally, the middle passive was kind of a combination. In some ways, at least, it was either described as middle or passive, essentially the same thing. And context will kind of demonstrate how to translate it. For something like this, it's very clear. It's either going to be middle or passive.
Yeah, there are some cases, you're right. So in the indicative mood, the middle passive, it just means the form for middle and passive are the same. And context has to help you to figure out if it's being used in a middle form or a middle function or passive function voice. But when you get to like the participles, it does differentiate between the middle and the passive with the predominantly with the tense formative for first aorist, right? Because there's a tense formative on first aorist, sigma alpha or theta eta. Well, sigma alpha is going to be for the active. Sigma alpha is going to tell you it's aorist for the active in the middle. Theta eta is going to tell you it's a aorist in the passive. The difference between the active and the middle is going to be the tense formative, as well as let's start with the tense formative. So active and middle in a participle is going to be differentiated by the tense formative, a nu tau versus a mena or mene. But it's also going to be differentiated by the case endings. Active voice is going to use a 3-1-3 case ending declension pattern. Middle voice is going to use a 2-1-2 declension pattern. So you'll be able to differentiate them in those ways, even though they have the same tense formative.
Okay. And okay.
Second aorist is pretty much the same thing, except you don't have the tense formative. Instead, you have the nu tau for all active voices and for the passive voice. In the middle, you use a 3-1-3 pattern for the case endings. And you'll have the mene, mena, mene participle morpheme for the middle. So you'll be able to differentiate that.
And for sake of translation, it's something that's always troubled me in the indicative mood is because now I see three ways to, three different paradigms, obviously,
Right.
for each first and second.
Right. Now you can more easily differentiate between active, middle, and passive, right? In the form.
In translating, are there still only two ways to translate it?
No, there's three ways. Middle is the most difficult way, right? We're used to active, right? Jake hit the ball, active. We're used to passive. Jake was hit by the ball. Okay, we have to put a helping word, was hit. If the verb is hit, was is the helping verb, was hit to show passiveness. Greek doesn't need to do that, but we do that in English as well. What we don't do in English very well, matter of fact, it's very difficult, is middle. In that Jake hit himself with the ball, or was hit himself with the ball. It's much more difficult to do that, especially, and not my strength here, but it's a little more complex, a little more difficult to express middle in English, and so we struggle with doing that oftentimes and try to have a bunch of helping words. Some grammars, such as the one we use with William Mouse on Basic of Biblical Greek, will also throw in what's called deponent. That is, oftentimes the middle voice will get translated, and it does oftentimes, active. Well, in part it gets translated active because we just don't have a good way to translate. And so some grammars will refer to that as almost like a different voice, a deponent. I don't teach that. I don't agree with that. So anyway, but that's in our book. But ultimately, we kind of do that because we struggle with doing the middle voice. Does that help? Was there a nod or a shake? Does that help?
I think he might be frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen.
You
They should make a
stunned
movie
him.
about him being frozen. Really, that was good. I'll move on. Okay.
You stunned him with your answer.
Yeah, I stunned him. Yeah, my stun gun. All right. Okay, here's one of my favorite charts, and this is one of the things I was redoing today, trying to make it a little more complete. Active participles. All right, what do we say about active participles? They're going to use the 3-1-3 declension pattern for our case endings. They're going to use the new tau for our participle morpheme, except for perfect, which we haven't done yet. Okay. And so these are all consistent for us. And on the present tense, we're going to use our present tense stem. There is no tense formative. We have a connecting vowel with a participle morphemes. We're using a 3-1-3 ending, and we're typically putting an ing, just like in English, ing ending on that participle, and we'll often use a while or because helping. While while the teacher was talking to Jake, he froze. You see, he froze is the sentence. While the teacher was talking to Jake is the participle phrase that talks about freezing. And so, or because the teacher was talking to Jake, he froze. There's a causal effect versus a temporal effect. And it's all has to do with what kind of main verb it is. And that's we'll get to that more. In the aorist, first aorist or second aorist, really doesn't matter. Aorist is an aorist in terms of how we translate, but how it looks, its form. And the aorist for the first, you're going to use the tense stem, the aorist tense stem with a tense formative. In the second aorist, we're going to use basically the root, the more accurate root stem without we're not going to use the present tense because it's a modified. The present tense is modified often. And there is no tense formative because we know it's aorist by the tense stem. And we have a connecting vowel, and again, it's active, so we're using the new tau, sigma alpha, again, the 3-1-3 pattern. And because it's aorist, we typically put an ed ending. Even though, sorry, I'll bring you back in, Jake. Even though we typically associate it with the main verb in relationship to past, so we'll typically say after. And we'll do the perfect later, but there we'll have an augment and we'll do some other things with it, okay? Those are active participles, all right? So all active, 3-1-3 pattern, every single one of them. And we use typically the new tau or the sigma alpha for the usi for the feminine, except, of course, when we get to perfect, but that's different. We'll get to that later. Passive, middle or passive participles, very much similar. We're going to use the 2-1-2 case ending patterns for all middle, except for the passive. There, the passive is going to use, much like the active, the 3-1-3 case ending pattern, declension pattern for case endings, and the new tau, as well as the usi for the feminine form. In the middle, as well, not just the middle, but the present, we have the menominee, right, for our participle morpheme. Our middle will have the menominee, and our perfect will also have a menominee for the middle. Now, to differentiate between the first aorist and the second aorist, in the middle, once again, we're going to have the sigma alpha or tense formative. For the passive, we'll have the tense formative with a theta eta for the tense formative. But for the second aorist, it's just a different form. Bal versus double lambda, or graph versus, I forget what it is in the perfect, I don't remember. But like lambano versus lab. So the stem is the key to recognizing that it's the aorist. And just like the passive, we said it's going to use much like the active. Again, we're using ed ending, and typically we'll say something like it's relative to the verb. It's after Jake came back, he threw up his hands and said, "Now I understand."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so hopefully this chart kind of gives you a big, nice little summary where you can read it. And that's really it, guys. That's kind of when we talk about adverbial participles. Key things: number one, it's modifying a verb in some form, right? Typically, you have a participle phrase, not just a participle. Not always, but a participle phrase, just like you have a prepositional phrase or some other clause. Um, and for the aorist, for the present tense and the active, pretty much all our active is going to use the new tau for the 3-1-3 pattern. All our middle is going to use the 2-1-2 pattern. The only unique thing is the aorist passive is going to use the same as the active. And then you have the different tense formatives, right? The sigma alpha, you already know. The only thing is we had the theta eta, which actually is not new because we did that in the passive for the indicative. If I remember right, yeah, we did. So I forget which tense that was. I think it was the aorist tense. The aorist tense indicative, we have a theta eta or passive. So, excuse me, theta epsilon, excuse me. So, only thing that's really new is the participle morpheme. Everything else you've had, it's just now putting it together. Okay?
Cool. There was a question I was trying to ask when I got my Wi-Fi went out. It seems to me that
Freeze again?
the
You're breaking up. No, we don't have you, Jake.
I just texted him and said you're froze again.
more
I mean, you're still alive, but you're intermittently alive.
So with how he's speaking, what voice and what time is he speaking in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that's not active.
No.
So, yeah, I don't know. That might be a new one. That's a Jake voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have internet issues like that, especially on Wi-Fi, if it's intermittent. So, yeah. I'll see if he comes back or if he's just gone. But because, did you have any questions, Sam?
I don't. I
Kind
don't.
of.
It's more the same, but there's just things to add to it now,
Sure,
you know.
sure. And that's what makes it kind of like, oh, my brain is going crazy, kind of thing. But just think of it as little, individual pieces. All right.
Yeah, that's how I always view it, is like, okay, it's more to the puzzle now of what
There
I
you
can
go.
put together.
It is a puzzle, and I like to work from outside in.
Hmm.
Okay, for a participle, I've got my tense stem on one end and my case ending in the other. When I move inward, I'm going to have on the next to the tense formative or next to the tense, I'm going to have a tense formative or not. If not, I have a connecting vowel. When I move in from the other side, from the case ending, I'm going to have a participle morpheme. And all those give me the clues of, am I looking at a present and first, it's easy, an active voice or middle voice. They're pretty easy to recognize. When you get to an active voice or middle voice, it's very easy to recognize
Hmm.
because those participle morphemes just stand out. The new tau versus the mina or the mene. If it's mina mene, it's middle. Okay, done. I know what voice it is. New tau, it's active, except for the aorist passive. That's the only sort of gotcha. And so you just got to say, okay, could this be an aorist passive? Otherwise, it's going to be an active voice. And then, and then the other thing is, was there a tense stem? If there is a tense stem and it's a theta eta, it's an aorist passive theta eta with a new tau. Oh, that's an aorist passive, even though it's got the new tau. It's using a 3-1-3 declension. So those are the clues. If I work from the outside in and remember those pieces, it makes sense. It comes together. Okay, do you want to try it again, Jake?
He's frozen.
You're frozen again, Jake. Well, Jake, we're just going to have to end it here, and hopefully, your question. You know what? Tell Jake. Jake, watch the recording. Tell Jake to Friday with Andres and Damian. It's Damian. It's not Damian.
That's right.
Damian. He's the perfect form, right? He's the
Yeah, that's right. You don't have
imperfective,
to.
imperfective aspect, perfect form. Actually, it'd be the combinative aspect, not imperfective. So correct him when he says it's the imperfective aspect. It's really the combinative.
Yeah, I was about to say if you add an extra
Yeah,
uh augment to it, duplicating, then
yeah.
he is in the
Reduplication.
perfect form.
That's right. Dummy. Anyway, I'm sure it. All right, last chance, Jake. What do you got?
I don't think the computer wants me to ask my question.
Yeah,
It wasn't even that crazy of a question.
I might be grateful for that. Okay, go ahead. Real quick.
I had to turn on my mobile hotspot on my phone because my Wi-Fi is terrible.
I'll be right back, y'all.
All right. Well, we're going to end after this, guys, because you got class here in a few minutes.
Yeah, it was more of a clarifying statement that it seems like participles are more clear on the middle passive and what exactly it is than verbs themselves, because you have different Greek words for, or in other words, with just a normal verb in, say, the indicative mood, you might have to guess, most of the time it's going to be pretty clear from the context, but say there's a really challenging area or a challenging verse, here, but for a participle, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. It's either middle or passive.
Yeah. Well, aorist, you find that it's not because of the participle, it's because of the aorist tense stem. When we did the indicative mood, it was the same with the aorist there, aorist tense there, where we have a theta epsilon as the tense stem or the tense formative for the passive. So it did differentiate. I can't remember if it was the middle and passive, or the passive. I think it was just passive. I have to go back and look on that, because if I had it all memorized, I'd be like smart, but I'm not. So let me look at something real quick.
Sure. And the only other thing I was dwelling on, and I know I'm bombarding you here,
Oh, you're
was
fine, buddy. Go ahead.
the deponent that you mentioned. Usually, you mentioned that the middle can sometimes and often does act as an active. Is that true with a passive as well, or is a passive only always going to be translated as passive?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that. I think the combination of middle and predominantly middle, but I think some passive forms. I really don't want to say, because I have to go back and look. I've read a long time ago the views on the deponent, and a lot of people, I say scholars, I'm not, but disagree, and that's something that's being still debated in scholarly circles. I just personally feel like we're adding something that's not there, but it is common to translate some middle voices. And here's the problem: it's a middle passive in many of the indicative forms, so you don't necessarily know if it's passive or middle. You have to interpret that, and then it's common to often translate it with an active voice in some cases, and they call that deponent. Now, I've not done enough study to say why or why not, or that kind of stuff. Let me answer the other question. Okay, it's not the participle form that makes it differentiate between the middle and passive. It's the aorist tense that does that. It's the same in the indicative. In the indicative, if you look on page 429, we have a master indicative verb chart. We have our sigma alpha for our active, aorist active, tense formative. We have for a liquid an alpha, but that's different. For the aorist, in the middle voice, we have the sigma alpha, but for the passive, we have the theta eta. So here in the participle, we have the theta epsilon instead of the sigma alpha. So in the indicative, the aorist is still differentiated between middle and passive. So it's not the
Okay.
participle form; it's the aorist tense that does differentiate more so than, say, the imperfect or the present or future kind of thing. So,
Gotcha. And so my last question would be: say you take, well, the future apparently has a paradigm for passive too.
actually, the future does differentiate quite extensively too with the theta eta. So the future and the aorist differentiates the middle and passive with the theta
Okay.
eta. Go ahead.
So at least for the present and imperfect, and maybe the perfect, but just take the present and the imperfect. Say you have a imperfect, or to make it easier, like a present middle passive Greek verb. It's easily present middle passive. It's just clear. It's within the paradigm. Could that be translated? Middle can sometimes translate as active. Could it be translated as active or middle or passive in one Greek word? Although it will only bear out one.
Let me study that a little more before I answer. Like I said, deponent is a little bit confusing for me and a little bit. But before I answer that, let me study that and get back to you next week.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine.
Because I don't want to give an answer off the cuff here. I know what I think, but I don't remember. I have to go look. So.
I
Okay.
appreciate it. Yeah,
All right, guys. Sam, close out in a prayer, and we'll let you guys go. You have class in 5 minutes, so try to give you a couple minutes away and practice your memory verse.
Yes, sir. All right, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that you blessed us with. Thank you for Dave and his love for you and his willingness to not only run this school, but to take time to teach us. God, I ask that you bless him, bless all the students here at GST. Be with us as we continue our studies. It's in your Son, Jesus' name, that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your next class.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
All right.